I'm excited to introduce you all to James Christensen. Most of you know him well, but for those who don't, James has been the president and CEO of Gateway, which is the only community bank in Mesa since it was founded in 2007. Prior to that, he served as the president of a community bank in Kansas for a decade. And all in all, he's worked in the banking industry for over 33 years and has also been really active in the community, serving on boards for Local First, Mesa's Economic Development Advisory Board, Mesa Rotary Club, United Food Bank, and several other local organizations. So we're proud to have him as our fearless leader and just an all-around wonderful person. So with that, I'll hand it over to James.
Great, thanks, Shana. I don't know how fearless I am this morning, but I'll give it a try. It's really good to see everybody here. I know we've got people from actually 3 or 4 different states, so thanks for taking time from your busy schedules to be here this morning for our first Fireside Chat and Zoom call. So I did get my Mr. Rogers sweater on for you. I'm all ready, and unfortunately you can't see full length. I was going to come change shoes, but I decided not to do that. So I want to welcome and thank all the team members and shareholders, directors and clients for their support and encouragement over the years, especially 2020. Also like to welcome the many friends at Gateway on the call who are not banking with us yet, but will be soon. Since we have such an impressive group on the call this morning, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, and I want to make sure and leave plenty of time for that. But I do want to make a few opening remarks and cover a few topics you requested that I cover when you send in your reservations. An American Banker article recently noted that 2020 was a horrible guest, but an excellent teacher. And I thought that was great. I'm sure many of you would agree. This year's felt more like a decade, and what we were doing a year ago seems like ancient history. One thing we learned in 2020, we are much more resilient than we thought. In the words of Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Our plan changed this year, but we adapted. In 2020, we learned the ability to display good humor during trying times, to look outside oneself and show empathy, and from a business model have made many changes to adapt to the now normal, but not the new normal. So we have to continue to remind ourselves this is temporary. Since this group really wants me to work for it, many of you requested we start with an easy topic like the stimulus in the economy. I have written this about 5 or 6 times over the last week, and it keeps changing. So I think I have it updated as of first thing this morning. So the most recent stimulus talks looks like something's going to happen this week, which as of last Friday didn't even look possible. A bipartisan group of senators has put forth 2 bills in hopes to break the gridlock. So there's actually 2 bills being presented right now. The first one is about a $750 billion package. And I'm gonna have to read this because it includes quite a bit. So this would include jobless benefits of $300 a week for 16 weeks, extend student loan forbearance through April of 21, extend eviction moratorium until the end of January 21, $300 billion for small business loans, and I'm not exactly sure what that's gonna look like or how that's carved up yet. $82 billion for schools and other education providers, $35 billion for healthcare providers, $25 billion for rental assistance and an increase in food stamps, along with $7 billion for grants to states for coronavirus testing and contact tracing, and finally about $2.6 billion for vaccine distribution infrastructure. So that's the first bill that's being presented, and that was a bipartisan effort to put that together. So that is the piece that I believe may get signed off on as early as today. They put everything that was an issue in the second bill, which is a $160 billion add-on, and that includes the 2 issues that were the biggest problem from both sides of the aisle. One of them was for state and local aid, which was an issue to have covered, and the other was a short-term liability shield for employers. So I think that's written in there on the liability shield for employers for 2021. So all the poison pills went in that one, and I would be really surprised if that one passed. As of this morning, it looked like that was not possible. So at this point, it's still unknown how McConnell and Pelosi and the two bills are gonna go. But I do think the $748 billion bill will get passed. With rising unemployment, rising virus spread and deaths, the expiration of the CARES Act benefit, hopefully they'll take action soon. It has to happen this week before they adjourn. I would be shocked if they didn't get it done this week, that they would come back next week. There's 12 million people that face losing benefits the day after Christmas, which is the end of the pandemic unemployment assistance and pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. Eviction moratoriums for renters and protection for student borrowers are also set to expire. So there is one other piece. Mnuchin has talked about another plan that was a little bit higher. I think that bill came to just under $1 trillion. It included everything that's in the $748 billion package, plus a $600 stimulus check. And I think there was about 160 million that received the $1,200 stimulus check last spring. And if you did another $1,200 stimulus check, that amounts to about 350 billion. So I know he has put in there a $600 stimulus check. However, the one piece that changes in the 748 billion, excuse me, is that they would lower the additional unemployment benefit of $300 a week, but I'm not sure what that drops to. All right. If Congress remains split, it's unlikely there's going to be a major spending or large additional stimulus bill early in 2021. If the Democrats control the House, Senate, and White House, it's likely there would be additional stimulus, and that most likely would include an additional stimulus check along potentially with PPP loans. So that's up for grabs right now. One of the things I ran across I thought was really interesting, the American Institute of CPAs last week found that 54% of business leaders believe their operations would be impacted if a second round of stimulus doesn't materialize. When asked about the most helpful steps the government could take, by far the largest, 83% said making progress in controlling the pandemic was the most important. Then 52% said overly burdensome regulations, and then 35% said keeping corporate tax rates low. So if Congress fails to pass any stimulus package, the Fed may look to longer maturity purchases in the quantitative easing program. So Fed's grown the balance sheet a ton, and this would grow it even more. That if that happens, that's a tool they have in their backpack, that this will push rates a little bit lower. They aren't going to use this if a stimulus bill gets signed. If a stimulus bill doesn't get signed, I would say this will start happening sooner than later. As far as the economy in Arizona in general, we had one of the strongest economies pre-COVID in the country, and I am still very bullish on Arizona going forward. The Arizona Bankers Association just put an article out last week, and they had very similar sentiments. They also pointed to there being several de novo applications in process, so for new banks in Arizona, and showing that as additional proof of the strength of the economy and the sustainability going forward. So that is my quick topic on the economy and the stimulus, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end. There's also a few of you on the call that requested I discuss the COVID vaccine for Arizona. It's really exciting to have the call this week now that the vaccine is being distributed. There's 58,000 doses that are arriving that have arrived this week. Healthcare workers are first in line. Next week, doses will be sent to all counties in tribes and skilled nursing facilities in Arizona. We're supposed to receive about 385,000 doses by the end of December, which is expected to cover the healthcare workers, long-term care residents. Following that, the next rounds are going to go to essential workers, adults over 65, adults with high-risk medical conditions, followed by the general public. And the general public is expected to start seeing vaccines sometime in March. Sign-ups are not open as of yet, and the vaccines are going to be free but not mandatory to receive. So we're hoping that by summertime, and at latest by early fall, that we'll return to some semblance of normalcy. Next up, PPP loans are always a topic of interest, so I think there's a couple folks that mentioned that. I thought I'd touch on it real quickly. Like I mentioned earlier, there's been some support of additional PPP funding, but I'm not going to know more about that until the new administration is in office in January. As far as the forgiveness process, it's continually changing, but it's going well. Gateway made about $24 million in PPP loans. And the majority of those loans, I think we're down to about waiting on the final 7 million forgiveness applications to be sent in and forgiven. But we're the lion's share through those. And really the only thing we're seeing as remaining balances on those loans that aren't being forgiven is if you received an EIDL grant, which was up to 10,000. So between 1 and 10,000 is what's remaining on some of those notes, but that's all we've seen so far. And if there's some other numbers junkies out there like I am, there were 4.89 million PPP loans, totaling more than 521 billion. And community banks handled almost 150 billion of those PPP loans, which is 28% of the PPP loans. And that's really impressive since the community banks only control about 12% of the total industry assets. So we handled about 225% of our fair share of those. So the community banks really stepped up across the country. Next up, since the election is never controversial, that was a topic to be brought up for discussion in respect to the impact on banking and rates. As far as banking, I believe there's going to be little impact on the banking industry, and rates are expected to stay low really for quite some time. The American Bankers Association has been meeting with the Biden transition team and has offered their expertise to the incoming administration, and they've really had productive meetings so far. And the FDIC is also working on efforts to modernize the supervision process, and that will continue. They're looking to continue to remove unnecessary regulations and operational uncertainties about banks adopting new technologies. And really with the fintech charters, really the fintech potentially could be a competitor to the banks, but really is more going to come alongside as a partner. And there really hasn't been a process in place so far that the banks can easily roll out new fintech technologies. So that's something they're working really hard on. They're also looking at an approach called continuous engagement, which is really a series of informal conversations throughout the course of the year. We do that somewhat now, but they're looking to have more of those conversations throughout the year. And what that is supposed to do is relieve some of the burden associated with the on-site exam. So depending on your bank, it's every 12 to 18 months. So that would hopefully reduce some of that burden. Also, the examiners have been working remotely since April of this year. They are actually remote all the way through April of next year, and that may get pushed through June of next year. So they're gonna work a year to 15 months from home. As far as rates, with the current uncertainty, the short-term Treasury rates have moved down over the trading sessions, with the 2-year Treasury earning a whopping 0.11 and the 5-year Treasury earning a 35 basis points. The 10-year is sticking fairly steady over the last month, around 90 basis points. And the Fed general consensus is they're not going to raise rates for at least 3 more years. I know there's several of you on the phone that are shareholders. I've got about a dozen shareholders on the call, and I thought I'd just cover real quick on the bank. And people ask questions on the dividend and our performance. As far as the dividend, all I can tell you is that the decision is going to be made at our board meeting on Thursday. So shareholders will be notified immediately afterward. And as far as the direction, I'm a strong believer that we should continue to be a for-profit bank. So gateways continue to perform well. We're going to continue to grow organically and attempt to raise the bar every year, which we've really done since we opened in 2007. As far as performance, we've been very blessed in 2020. Our total assets have grown by almost 35% this year, which is incredible. We've seen an increase in assets significantly more than the PPP boost. So the large banks have been really kind to the community banks in 2020. We now have over 182 million in assets. Not bad after starting in 2007 with about 11 million. So we've seen some nice growth over the years. We've also seen, even with pulling the PPP loans out, we've grown the loan portfolio about 6 or 7% this year, once you exclude the PPP loans. And this has been our most profitable year to date. And we're about 300,000 ahead of a really aggressive budget we set at the end of 2019. So our team and board have worked really hard in 2020 for the community, the shareholders, and our customers. So really have to give a big shout out and thank you to all of them. I'm almost done with my comments here. I know I'm getting a little long-winded, but I was trying to cover everything everyone discussed prior to the meeting. So a few asked about mobile banking, and there's also been a noticeable increase in that area. People now use mobile apps more than any other method to manage their bank accounts. It's about 40% now, which is an 8% jump just since spring, which is really a very large increase. And I'm sure that will continue. So our timing to roll out the new app earlier in the year was perfect. So at this point, I'm sure you have a few softball questions for me and a few topics that are not quite so heady, but if you're ready to hit me with the hard questions, I'm ready. If I can't answer your question on the call, I'll definitely follow up afterwards. So I'm going to turn it back over to Shayna to handle the next portion here.
Sure, thanks, James. Great update there. I haven't seen any new questions come through, but if anyone has an additional question or a topic that you'd like James to discuss, I believe you have the ability to unmute yourself now. So does anybody have a new question or topic that you'd like James to touch on? We'll give you a couple seconds here.
And if you haven't stopped and picked up your Gateway Bank mask, you need to swing by and drive through. We'll make sure we hook you up. So.
Great. Well, we'll leave it open for a few minutes for any additional questions. And you're also welcome to unmute yourself and just say hello to James and to the group. And if we do have a few questions come up, we may mute everyone again and go back to Q&A. But for right now, feel free to unmute and say hello.
Hello. I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand virtually. Sorry about that.
Sure.
One quick question and a follow-up from the PPP. You mentioned the EIDL grants with regard to the PPP. Is there any information about extending or adding on to EIDL loans that were given?
Onto the EIDL or on the PPP side?
EIDL side.
On the EIDL, I am not sure, and I will look into it. On the PPP side, I do know that we have the ability, the way they're set up is to amortize over the remainder of the 2-year period. And I know that with approval from the SBA can be extended if necessary. So far, the majority of our clients that also received an EIDL grant went ahead and retired that when the PPP loan was forgiven. But on the EIDL side, I will find out and I can get back to you, Sheila.
Thank you.
Yep.
James, I was also wondering if they approve the PPP loans, do you have any idea if you received it before, will you be able to apply again, or is there talks of just making those available to companies that possibly didn't get the PPP loan the first time?
And right now it's not, a second round is not in the bill. But I think depending on what happens by the end of January, there may be another round. And if it is, I would assume, at least our assumption at this point is that it would be anyone that already received one could also apply again. Early on, that was some of the discussion, but it's pretty early and I'm not sure how that's going to end up at this point. But I do think it would open up for folks that received it the first time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any other follow-up questions for James here?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people on the call that are way smarter than I am, so you can hit tough questions. So.
Well, feel free to chime in with any other questions, everyone. And otherwise, we'll open it up for the rest of the time here. Maybe stay on till about 9:30 just to chat and catch up with each other. If you're going to drop off, thank you so much for joining us. We will be posting the recording of this call on our site and on social media so that you can reference it back or share it with anyone who wasn't able to join us. I did just see a question from Jean. They said, can you share any of the fintech options that may be coming?
Yeah, so really there's a few that we've seen in Arizona. So Arizona has the FinTech Sandbox, and there is a company called Vertigree. I think they're operating under a name called BrightFi. And what their purpose or mission is to come out with a product that helps bank the unbanked. And so really what it is, it's really the equivalent of a debit card where you would never get an overdraft fee. And it's possible with the debit card that you can go overdrawn, you just wouldn't get charged, but there's a membership fee attached to that. So I think, last I heard that was going to be somewhere in the $10 a month range if that came out. And so you'd pay $120 a year for that service, but then there wouldn't be any overdraft fees throughout the course of the year. So that's something I know that they were looking to, their initial intent was to roll that out or to test it with the banks and then roll it out as its own completely separate entity if they get a charter. I know they've applied with the state of Arizona. That charter has not been granted yet. I saw an article in the paper a couple of weeks ago that said it had, and it hasn't. If they can't get their own charter, I think they were going to try to piggyback that on top of some of the community banks and let them roll out that product. That's one that I know of. I've heard of several others, but none as far along as that one in Arizona.
James, as a follow-up question to that, are there any other technology advancements that you're seeing just in banking in general, whether it's new things with mobile deposit or things to accommodate some of the changes with COVID and more people working and banking remotely?
Yeah, really, it's just been it's really just been an increase in the mobile banking. I don't think, and where that hurts some of the smaller banks is not having that technology, because a lot of the smaller community banks don't have that technology. So that has become an obstacle. Technology, as far as Gateway is concerned, we think it evens the playing field. So it lets, I'd put our mobile app up against most. So I think it makes it just as easy to bank here as if, you thought you needed to bank at one of the 3 large national banks.
Awesome. Yeah, and for anybody that doesn't have the Gateway Bank mobile app, that is available for both Apple and Android. And you're able to find that information on our website for where to download that, or you can search in the App Store. Well, thank you again to everyone for joining us. Feel free to stick around and chat with James or the group. And otherwise, very happy holidays, and we will see you in the new year.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day. Merry Christmas.